Hi, it's Mike Stephenson here. In today's video, we're going to talk about an awesome new feature we've released with Turbo 360 for the business activity monitoring module. In this video, we're going to look at it used in the scope of Logic App consumption. So, business activity monitoring, we're really trying to address this problem of shifting support left, and we want to get support moving away from everything going to the expert developers who need to be building new stuff. We need to first transition it to the support people, and then ideally transition some visibility and self-service to business users as well. And that's how we can make the integration platform, go to the level that companies want. So really, some of the challenges we have at the moment, if we look at the support operator here, they struggle to support the solution because it's too complicated. They don't have simplified visibility, and they need expert Azure skills to be able to do simple tasks like track a message. That transitions on to business users who they have a desire for visibility of the integration platform. They want to know, what integrations have we got? Can we see that they're executing? And can we do some basic troubleshooting to deal with our own issues rather than having to raise a support ticket every time? So in Turbo 360, we have 4 modules. The one we're talking about today is business activity monitoring, and we're going to have a little bit of a look in a deeper example of that. Now, we already have the business activity monitoring feature, and we can integrate with that. So down here, we've got a user using Turbo 360 to see business processes executing. And currently we can have the most common scenarios people using Azure integration services, things like Logic Apps, functions, API management. We do have users who do things like PowerShell background jobs. They want to create visibility of what's happening, so they can do that in Turbo 360. Power Automate's grown quite a bit. We have the ability for things like Data Factory. You can do it from custom C# code, or anything that can make an HTTP call can integrate with Turbo 360 BAM. We also have examples with other iPaaS platforms. So recently we did one with Friends. You can do MuleSoft. We have customers using SAP's integration suite as well. Now, the key thing in our current architecture, if we look here at the next slide, is that we have a push model currently. So behind the scenes in Turbo 360, you would have your event processing, API, and background components. So all of these components over here would be sending data to Turbo 360 to say things like, I've started a transaction, here's an update for what's going on with that transaction. We would then process that data, and we would store it into a database that the customer provides so they can store their business data. Now, the good thing about the push model is it opens up the ability for us to build an API that has a bunch of assumptions about how you're going to use Turbo 360 and how you're going to do BAM. That opens up a bunch of advanced features. But one of the trade-offs with that is you then have to push to the Turbo 360 API. So for example, from a Logic app, you would need the connector or some kind of API call to tell Turbo 360 what to do. That meant that if you're already an existing Logic app customer and you want to, you want to take the logs that you might already have, you can't easily get those into Turbo 360. So this is what this new feature that we've built is, to open up other customers who've already done things. So a good example here would be with Logic App consumption. Customers are using the diagnostic feed into a log analytics workspace. And what we're going to demonstrate today is how Turbo 360 can sit executing KQL or custo queries against that workspace that's provided by Azure Monitor. We can then create a business process friendly view on top of that to help empower your users. So if we go over to the portal here, what I'll do to start with is we'll show what we can achieve with Turbo 360, and then we can show how we implement that. So to begin with, I guess I'll show a quick example of this employee benefits Logic app. So we've got a Logic app that runs on a schedule every day, and You can see as it executes, it does a couple of key things. So number one, it pulls data out of the employee benefits system here, transforms the data, creates it in a blob storage account that just simulates a demo of sending it to a partner. So that might be an FTP location or something like that. Now, in the current BAM that we've got, where you do the push model, in this example, you can see we've got a shape here saying start transaction, and we've got a shape saying get employee or update the transaction that you've got the benefits. So that's where you're telling Turbo 360 what you've done. But what we can do with the new feature is we're leveraging the diagnostic settings here. So we'll see those come up in a second. And this is pushing out to a log analytics workspace. And we can then leverage the data that you're already logging to create a friendly view of that. So over in Turbo 360, you can see we've got this drop-down list up here where you can change between the types of BAM. So we've got the internal Turbo 360 BAM, and we've also got the new data query feature. Now, here I can model processes in a structure. You know, this tree view, you could model things like applications, departments. And here I've got a business process, which is a collection of transactions. What I'm able to do here is I can have multiple transactions that I want to show to the user to see what's going on. So if we imagine in this scenario, we send a batch file every day to a target system. So you can see here we've got, from this query, I've got things like what's the file name, what's the time it was generated. I've also leveraged in this case, because we know it's a Logic app, I've got the workflow ID, whether it was successful. And I could have multiple transactions showing up potentially in Turbo 360 within the business process, so I could just choose the query here that I want to see. And one of the cool things we've got as well is I can click on one of these transactions and it'll open it up and it'll show me a series of steps. So here, if you imagine my Logic app might be complicated with 100 shapes in it, the support user and the business user doesn't really care about all of those 100 shapes. They want to know the key milestones. So did it start? Did we get the data? Did we transform it? Did we deliver the file? Those key things that show them what's going on and if there was any problems. So what I can do in here with these shapes is I can also click on them, and you can see I can see a bunch of properties about what happened. So we've got things like the Logic app ID, so that's actually the action in the resource ID in this stage. I've got the resource group it's in and a bunch of other properties. So here in this query, I'm just actually exposing all properties, but I could filter these in the query to just be the ones I want to share. And I can see things like the run ID, I think we've mentioned. And if I have any promoted properties on this shape as well, they would also appear in this list here if I wanted them to. Now, the question really at this point is, how do I achieve this view to see what's going on? So we're going to go through the process of creating a new business process here. So I'm going to create the exact same one we've got. So we'll have employee benefits 2. Now, what I need to do next is I'm going to have to go and create a transaction. So we'll have a benefits transaction. And the direction's really more of like a visual thing. So I'm going to create this as an outbound transaction because I'm sending data to somebody else. And then I need to check what kind of data source am I going to use. So in this case, we'll use log analytics. And I can choose one data source to be the source of the transaction. Now, as we go into the stages could be different data sources if you wanted them to. But in my case, I'm going to use this this log analytics here. Now, the next thing I need to provide is a query. So we're going to go over to the Azure portal now and have a little bit of a look at some of the data that's available from this diagnostic settings. So if I run this query here, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of events. If we look at the resource here, we can see that one's a run ID, so that's probably a workflow level event, whereas the other ones look like action names. So they're going to be action level events. And I'll be able to see if we go down, for example, down here, you can see I've got a whole bunch of properties available that I can leverage. I think if I remember right, this parse JSON I think has has some custom properties on it, so things like the file name should be down here somewhere. There we go. So that's the file name as a promoted property. That's just a standard tracker property in the Logic app. So we need a couple of queries to build this BAM view. The first one we're going to have a look at here is really how I create the transaction grid at the top. So I'm going to run this query and have a look at what it looks like first. So if we run it for 7 days, you can see this is a bit like the view we had in Turbo 360. So I've got my time, my file name, when it started, when it ended, and what the result was. Now, to achieve this query, I'm going to basically create two tables in my query. So you can see here we've got the let started event, run start events, and let run workflow complete events. And what I'm going to do is create these two tables in the custo query, and then I'm going to do a join. So I'm going to create a join based on the workflow ID, which will give me the start and the end record, and then I can just project out the columns that I want so I get a single row. Now, what I'm doing here is in the start event, I have a choice. I can either use an action or I can use the workflow started event if I wanted as well. I'm going to actually use the action. In this case, I'm looking for a query that looks for workflow or action completed in a given resource group for a given Logic app, and I'm actually looking for this parse JSON, and you can see here I'm extending out a couple of columns. That'll give me things like the workflow ID and the file name, and then I'm also looking for here the workflow completed event, so I can get the time that the workflow completed. Now, what I'm going to do with this query in our business process we're building, I'm going to go and put that in the query here. I execute it and it'll give me some properties that I can choose from. So here I've got to do a couple of things. The first one, promote properties for correlation. So as I build my process, there'll be properties from the transaction I want to use to find the events that make up what that transaction did. So in my case, I'm going to promote the workflow ID, but I could actually promote other properties if I wanted. I'm also going to use the workflow ID as the instance ID. I've got a field telling me when the transaction started and one telling me when it ended. And I could do an extended field in the query to give me the duration if I wanted, but we'll leave that blank for now. Next up, we need the status. So I'm going to choose the result. And if the result is failed, then that would be a failure. And if the result was succeeded, then that would be a success. I do have some options down at the bottom here for batch transactions, so I can indicate ones that make up like a batch or group of transactions, so I can configure parent-child type stuff here. At this point, I'm going to go and create my transaction, and I'm going to cancel this shape for now, and we're just going to have a look at what this does without adding any shapes to the diagram. So if I go back to the tracking view, and you can see if we have a query here of the last 7 days for my benefits transaction, we get those files that we, or those list of log events showing which files got processed. I can also add a couple of extra columns here if I wanted to. Let's take the workflow name off. And I can save that view, so we'll save that as our default view. So that'll be available every time I come back in, and I can have a look at what I've processed recently. Now, what I can do next, if I click on here, obviously we've got no shapes lighting up yet, so we need to go and have a look at how we build that bit. So going back to our transaction designer here, I'm now going to add a shape called get employee data. The friendly name lets me change the name in the diagram to help the users if I wanted to. And again, I'm going to pick log analytics. It's the same log as before, and actually the bit down the bottom here that just moved down is I can also choose what icon I want to show in the diagram. So in this case we'll just use a Logic App icon. Now The next bit we're going to look at is a query here that's going to query for the action. So what I'm looking for is the Logic App provider for a given resource group for this Logic App, and we're looking for the workflow action completed step for this HTTP action. So this is really back in the designer here. We're really looking for that HTTP action here. Now, I'm going to come back to the run ID in a second, but these are properties again that I can promote out of the query if I wanted to make them available in the designer. But here what we're doing is here, this is where the correlation comes into play. So I'm going to look for ones that match this run ID. So that gives me the log event for the specific Logic App we're looking for. And this bit here is a special Turbo 360 parameter. So because we promoted workflow ID for correlation in the transaction, we can access this in this query just using the curly brackets around it here. So if I take this query, you can see here, pasted in, it's telling me that I actually have this ID available for correlation. If I had other IDs, I could use them in the query if I wanted. So we'll go and execute my query now. And I'll have some optional settings available. So I could do things like promote other properties. So where this gets quite cool is if I have the second shape, I would correlate off the shape before it. I can actually correlate individual properties or transaction level properties, which is quite cool. I'm going to leave these fields here to be just the standard that we already had. So this time the status is going to come from a field called status_s, and if I put failed and successful, I think it was succeeded actually rather than successful. And you can see I've now got my new shape here, so we'll drag that into the diagram, join that up. And if we save that, now we go back to the tracking, and you can see if I now click on that top one here, it opens it up and we can see the shape's lit up because we found a match and we knew it was successful, and click the details and that shows me all the properties that were available there. So really quick and easy, in a couple of minutes I've just set up a BAM view that makes it easy for my support users and business users to see what's going on. Now we can go beyond this, so if we go back to our original first setup here, we can do things like dashboards. So here I've got a dashboard where I'm showing the number of succeeded and failed ones and the number of runs per day. So I can just edit these widgets. A good example would be I'll add a new widget. So we choose the transaction. We can put some filters on the query here. So if I wanted status, for example, I could add different fields here. So maybe start date greater than a certain date or something. I can change what properties we show. If I maybe choose a top chart, would be a bar chart, line chart, so kind of like a typical line chart. We can have multi-series as well. And I just build the graphs that make sense for my dashboard to show the users an overview of what's happened in the period. So with this particular process, I'm going to keep it on a 7-day view by default, but some processes you might want last hour, others you might want last 30 days. I can also go at this point to the monitoring, and I can also use a query here. So I've configured this to say go and run check every hour, and in this query down the bottom I've got a file errors query. So I've said if there's any errors in the last 24 hours, so I'm looking for ones where the result is failed, raise a warning or an error if there's, depending on the number of rows that come back. I can also put a note in here so I could see some advice for what the person should do if there is an error. And then if that triggers my monitoring here, I would get an alert to the Teams channel that you would see here. I can also do things like a ServiceNow ticket, DevOps work item, email. I can do things like an escalation policy here. So if I want to, raise a Teams message, and if nobody sorts it out, raise a ServiceNow ticket and get an SLA on it, that would be doable as well. And hopefully at this point, I'm hoping that this shows how easy, if you've used the out-of-the-box diagnostic settings for Logic App consumption, Turbo 360 can really easily give you a way to put a business process dashboard on it so that you can start empowering users to see the different transactions that you've got and um, start getting involved in these transactions. We'll be doing more with this feature over the coming releases, but we hope this gives existing customers for Logic Apps a way to really get involved with Turbo 360 and start helping make their integration platform visible and transparent to users. Thanks for listening to today's video. Have a great week.